It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
What's your message to Keir Starmer?
The political future of Diane Abbott remains unclear. She's been readmitted as a Labour MP, but will she stand in July's election?
I think that Labour ought to afford Diane Abbott greater respect and greater dignity.
What she said that led to her suspension was wrong, and when Keir Starmer said he would restore discipline and standards in the Labour Party, he really meant it.
On the campaign trail, Rishi Sunak is in Cornwall promoting his policy to close rip-off university courses to pay for an extra 100,000 apprenticeships.
About 1 in 3 graduates are on non-graduate jobs. So actually, we are better off providing those young people with the opportunity of a high-quality apprenticeship.
Labour pledges to clear NHS waiting lists in 5 years as junior doctors call a 5-day strike just before the election. And it's a week since that rain-soaked announcement. How are the parties faring? Joining us today, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, Shadow Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard, the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole, and Ava Santina Evans, political correspondent for online news site Politics Joe. This is Politics Live. Yes, it is a week since Rishi Sunak stood in Downing Street in the rain and called that snap election. We're going to talk about the issues today that you saw there in the headlines, health and apprenticeships. But before we get to the substance of those policies and announcements, what have we learnt that's new about Rishi Sunak, Tom, in a week?
Well, we learned he's got a tremendous amount of energy. He's been around half the country already, and he has demonstrated that he's up for a fight and he's taking the message to the British people. That is something that's been really important because we've noticed he's got a clear plan. He's able to articulate it. He's able to explain it to the British people.
And you're 20 points behind in the polls.
And Keir, sadly, has not quite managed the same thing.
What have we learnt that's new about Keir Starmer?
Well, contrary to that, we've been setting out our clear plan. It's very obvious that the Conservatives have failed after 14 years. I think the Tories have had an appalling start to the general election. But what we've done is set out clear plans on the NHS, setting out clear dividing differences and the fact that to get stability, we need change. Change is on the ballot paper on July the 4th, and that's a change with the Labour government.
Ava, has a week of campaigning changed anything?
Well, I mean, we've had a strike announced this morning from the junior doctors, and we've also had, the Labour campaign overshadowed by Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott. So actually, I think we're about where we were this time last year.
Right, we haven't even moved on since then. Has anything changed, Harry?
Beginning to get there. I think both the campaigns, I have to say, are pretty boring at the moment. The Tories perhaps a little more exciting because 20 points down, they've got nothing to lose, so they're throwing every policy idea at the wall, where Starmer's clearly trying not to say anything. But we're beginning to, as Ava say, be slightly distracted by other characters. We've got Diane Abbott today, and enter stage right, Nigel Farage, who appears to be going out of his way to cause as much mischief as possible. And we actually had him on our rival Politics show this morning, and he said he's open to a deal with Rishi Sunak, make him an offer. What's in it for him? Which is not what Reform are saying. So could be interesting times.
Should Rishi Sunak talk to Nigel Farage about a deal? Of course, there was a deal done in 2019, which meant that Brexit Party candidates didn't stand where they felt there were Conservatives who felt the same way as them on the issue of Brexit. Do you think that should happen again?
Look, the only people we should be doing a deal with is the British people, and the deal we're making is to make an offer for how to govern this country better for the next 5 years, and I think Rishi's absolutely right to be focusing on that.
Right. I mean, do you think that'll go any further? As you say, it's not really anything Reform has discussed.
Well, it went pretty far in 2019, and Farage was saying that he doesn't want a peerage, he doesn't want a knighthood. He'd quite like to see the wrong type of Tory party salted into the ground. But if they start to make mood music that he likes, I think ECHR and things like that, I wonder in a long 6 weeks whether they really will be standing in every single seat as they've vowed to do.
As you say, a long 6 weeks. Let's have a look at this tweet, since we've obviously mentioned it, on junior doctors. This will be at the forefront of many people's minds. It says, junior doctors, let's make sure full pay restoration stays front and centre during this election. We strike again with a 5-day full walkout from 7 a.m. on the 27th of June to 7 a.m. on the 2nd of July. Let's make this round of action our biggest and loudest yet. What's your response, Tom?
Look, I'm very sorry to see this. I'm really sorry because of the impact it's going to have on patients across the country and the impact it's going to have on others who are going to carry the burden. A lot of consultants, a lot of other doctors are going to have to pick up the weight. The real question here is, does Labour support these strikes? Because this is a decision that you've got to make. Either you're on the side of the patients or you're on the side of those who are striking. And, we put a very reasonable offer on the table. The nurses have accepted it. Other doctors have accepted it. The junior doctors are asking for 35%. Do you support the strikers, Luke, or do you support the patients?
I mean, we still don't support the strikes. That's been a consistent position for months. I'm surprised you don't know it and haven't been paying attention,
well, it's not
Tom.
clear, Luke.
But we've said we don't
you.
support the strikes. But what we want to do is get round the table in the first week of a Labour government, get the unions in to negotiate and solve the strike action. That will be a journey. It won't be a single event. We'll have to look at not only pay, but the terms and conditions as well. That's what we've said. We'll sit down and negotiate. Why hasn't Rishi Sunak negotiated? He spent more time negotiating with Boris Johnson to give his mates peerages than he's done with junior doctors. So this is the NHS. It should matter more. Why isn't the negotiation take place?
Vicky Atkins has been negotiating with doctors, and that's why you've seen that there's been huge numbers. That's why you've seen a huge number of agreements settled, and that's why you've seen waiting lists coming down in Conservative-run England and going up in Labour-run Wales. I'm afraid you don't need to look at the hypotheticals. You don't need to look at the suppositions. The truth is the NHS in Wales has suffered under Labour rule, and in England it has improved under Conservative.
But under Vaughan Gething, he's resolved the strike action in Wales. That's why there's no junior doctor strike action in Wales. But in
Luke, look at the results.
We're on a glide path to hit 10 million people waiting if we get 5 more years of the Conservatives.
Look, you don't need me to point this out to you. All the statistics are clear. The waiting lists are coming down in England. They're going up in Wales. You can argue what you like. The statistics are very, very clear.
What is the level of waiting?
Well, we've got the 2-year wait down. We've got them 18-month.
Million people on waiting lists.
All of them are coming down. And as soon as these strikes are resolved, then they will come down even quicker. In those gaps between strikes, the waiting lists have come down extremely quickly. In Wales, they keep going up. Labour put the waiting list up and the Conservatives bring them down.
It is the 11th walkout by junior doctors since March 2023.
Why does it look political? Because Labour and Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has been out this morning and he said that he won't offer them a 35% pay rise. So I don't think that they're trying to gift Labour any votes because Labour aren't offering them any negotiations.
Well, it looks political because it's being played during a political campaign rather than waiting until politicians or whoever's
but you're still, Cabinet is still there. You're still able to negotiate with them. And, you do have the choice at the moment where you either pay the agency staff to come in and take over from them while they're on strike, or you actually settle the dispute. And, arguably, it would be much cheaper for you if you actually just settle the dispute than bringing in agency workers.
Ava, look, the decision is whether you think 35% is reasonable. The real question is not whether we invest in the NHS. This government has invested more than any other previous administration in the NHS.
But not in the workers.
Hang on a minute. The question is, where do you put it? Because there's huge technological changes. We've seen the massive increase in technology driving to some amazing new drugs for MS care. There's one of my friends in Kent has just got an amazing drug. It's incredibly expensive, but it's really important in cancer care and so much else. The money's got to go in many different areas, and that's where the choice has to be made.
All right.
And you've got to look at the reasonable choice. Is 35% reasonable? And I think when you're talking to British workers who are not getting similar rises, you've got to look honestly at what the choices are.
Well, that is the backdrop, certainly, to today and now the election campaign. The Daily Telegraph headline, in the midst of all this, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, I will outdo Blair to clear the NHS backlog. So Labour is promising that within 5 years of government, it would clear the backlog of people waiting 18 weeks for treatment. How will you do it?
Well, we've set out that we'll have 40,000 extra evening and weekend appointments a week to start clearing the backlog, double the number of scanners to increase early diagnosis, and make sure that we're resolving the junior doctor strikes. Now, this is going to take some time. That's why we've said at the end of a 5-year Labour government, we'll have cut the waiting times to 18 weeks, which is where it clinically should be. The government inherited this golden inheritance on the NHS in 2010, the highest patient satisfaction and the lowest waiting list. 14 years later, we have the highest waiting list and the lowest patient satisfaction. We fixed the NHS before and we'll have to fix it again.
You didn't say the P word, Luke. Private sector, because that's what really is going to do this. It's a massive expansion into using the private sector, which is, no bad thing. But just listen to Luke there. It's incredible. In 5 years, the last general election, Labour, it was 24 hours to save the NHS. Tories are going to sell it to Donald Trump. And now Labour are saying, quite sensibly in my view, let's use the private sector, let's do whatever we can. The other thing that they haven't talked about and sort of glossed over there was the fact there's also a massive expansion into weekend working. Now, these are all good things, but you're not being completely clear with what promise
I mean,
of West
Wes
Street
has set
comes
out
with.
that we will use spare capacity in the independent sector in order to cut some of that waiting
But just saying, that's an
list. But we'll
extraordinary
also
difference
take
in 5 years, though,
We'll
isn't
also
it?
take the best of the NHS. So hospitals like St James's in Leeds and Guy's here in London, they're already working at that pace that we want to export to every single NHS hospital in the country. So it shows that the NHS can innovate, and we want to spread that innovation across the NHS. And that's our plan.
It's been a journey. It's been a very long journey.
And it is a tall order.
Let's
talk to the Chief Executive of the King's Fund think tank, Sarah Woolnough. Sarah, just listening to those opening exchanges, is Labour's promise and target realistic?
It's very stretching. When the last Labour government made a similar commitment to bring down waiting times, it took them a decade to do it. Today's pledge talks about reducing the waiting time over the course of a single parliament. That's 5 years. And we think, whilst it plays very well to the public and polling, and we have seen a drop in satisfaction recorded with the NHS, and people cite waiting, struggling to access as the top reasons they are dissatisfied with the NHS. We believe this sort of pledge, if it were to be delivered within 5 years, is highly stretching, and it would involve new money, but also priority and focus, and a sort of singular focus for the NHS for the next 5 years, which may mean capacity for other things is limited.
OK. Well, we can see Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, with the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. They've been talking to medical students this morning to underline this target that they're setting. Specifically, what difficulties do you see Labour facing in reaching what you call this stretching target?
Well, the target relies on, as we've heard, weekend working, evening appointments. And again, I think for the public and for patients, that's probably welcome. Of course, it does rely on staff being willing to work overtime. The latest NHS staff survey showed 20% of staff reporting they're already working over 5 hours overtime. So we have got to ensure, at a time when we've still got industrial action going on, that we've got sufficient staff to fulfil this pledge. I think whoever forms the next government, trying to resolve industrial action very quickly is going to be pretty key to improving NHS performance. We've also got other things going on in our health and care system. As one example, we've got an 11.6 billion backlog in maintenance for our hospitals. We've got pretty crumbling estates in lots of parts of the country. And so sometimes actually that's a rate limiting step. You can't do more activity because the facilities don't allow you to do so.
Sarah, stay with us if you can. Luke, where are you going to find the healthcare staff to work evenings and weekends to cover the 40,000 extra shifts a week?
Well, we've also set out as part of our plan the biggest expansion of NHS workforce in the history.
And how long will that take?
Well, it's not going to be able to deliver it on day one. That's why we've set out our ambitions for a decade of recovery, and that's why Keir and Wes...
This pledge is a first term of a Labour government.
And that's why the steps that Keir set out just before the election called, the first steps, was the things that we'd do immediately on getting into power. This sets a clear objective at the end of the first 5 years of a Labour government that waiting times will be reduced to 18 weeks, which is where they should be.
Right, and if you haven't cleared that backlog, and you've said it is a key pledge, it's a contract, if you like, with voters, would you expect to be voted out? I mean, if you break this pledge in the sense that you think this is core to what you're doing, would you expect then to be voted out?
Well, we haven't won this general election, let alone the next one, Jo. But your optimism is welcome there. But we want to see the NHS fixed because, look, the NHS is crumbling. We've got a crisis in the NHS. It's not only in hospitals, but in GPs and dentists as well, and mental health care. The NHS is in a really awful state after 14 years. And so I don't think 5 more years is going to change that to fix it. It's only going to make it worse if we have a Conservative government re-elected. We're on a trajectory to 10 million people waiting for NHS care. That's far too much.
Right.
That's why we've got to get on top of it. But we're only promising at this election what we know we can deliver. And that's why we're setting out those first steps.
You know you can deliver it, but just as a bit of context, health spending under the last Labour government grew by an average of 7.9% between 2001 and 2006. Now it's sort of 2.4%. So if Labour wins the next election, they're not going to have the spending power. You're not committing to any more money over and above what has been spent or invested in by the Conservatives. How are you going to do it?
Well, we have said we'll increase spending in certain areas due to closing non-dom loopholes.
A little bit.
Rachel Reeves has been pretty clear on this, that actually to invest in the public services we need to inject growth back into the economy.
Yeah.
That growth that's been missing from the economy for the past decade. In that growth comes additional tax revenues, which means the money will be there to invest in those public services.
All right,
that's why that growth mission is the key objective that the Labour Party is setting out in this election.
Do you think it's achievable, Ava?
Well, using the private sector
sector
and the waiting list. Well, look, I think we're already doing this at the moment. The problem that you've actually got two bad offerings for the NHS. If I was a voter, well, I am a voter, but I'd be I would be looking at this and I'd think, actually, I don't like either option, because if I take the Conservative option, then I know that I've got more strikes, I've got stagnation, I've got a huge waiting list. If I take the Labour option, I know that they're going to spend an absolute fortune in trying to use private healthcare and bringing that into the NHS. And I also know that that plan is not feasible because it's simply too expensive.
In the very slim offerings of what Labour have offered so far in terms of detail and policy, for some readers, I think the NHS journey is the most interesting thing that's being offered at the moment. For 40 years, the NHS debate has been poisoned by the Labour Party in the fact that anyone who tries to suggest modernisation or movement is accused of wanting to sell it or turn it into a US model. They're now not doing that.
No.
They're now saying we're Nixon in China. Only Labour, because we have the respect of the NHS and we were the founders of the NHS, we are the ones that can reform it. Now that's movement in our view. But, my God, we will hold your feet to the fire if you do win on that. Because only, if it's really true, only Labour can save the NHS. Well, the NHS is on its knees, so good luck. And you're going to hit the same problems that these guys have got.
Right.
You've got a militant BMA. That's the reason they're still out. They've been taken over by Corbynista lunatics.
That's harrowing.
It's not. Look at the committee. They are incredibly hard left. I know I'm pouring petrol on this debate, but it needs to be had. You're going to hit the same problems. You're trying the same solutions.
They're not charity workers, and they are quite within their right to get paid for their labour.
Yeah, but every other sector, as Thomas said, every other strand of the NHS has settled so far on a much lower deal.
Right, I mean, let me just show you this, the Sunday Times, to pick up on what you've been saying, Harry. Wes Streeting, cultural rot means NHS puts itself before the public. Is there a risk involved in talking about the NHS in this way, when for many voters out there, it's sacrosanct?
I mean, the NHS is absolutely vital. It helped save me when I had skin cancer last year.
What's the cultural rot?
What Wes is setting out is that we need not only investment, but reform in the NHS as well. And that element of focusing on reform is just as important as it is about the extra cash that will go in, because we need to see
larger amounts of private sector involvement.
The efficiency to be able to deliver. And at the moment, when you've got an NHS with people waiting every single service under pressure, no service within the NHS can perform as it should be, as it's designed to be, because there's massive pressure on the staff and there's massive pressure on the waiting list. Cutting those waiting lists enable every part of our NHS to function better than it is today.
And do you agree there's cultural rot at the heart of
I think
the
what
NHS?
Wes has set out is an interesting idea, and he's basically setting out a Conservative agenda. It'd be very welcome. But the reality is that he's trying to deliver it through a Labour Party that has flip-flopped on so many issues. It's almost certain to flip-flop on this. And if you want to really look at the experiment, which is the control, which is the reality, look at Labour-run Wales. Look at the NHS in Wales, where waiting lists are going up, and look at England, where they're going down.
Sarah Woolnough, thank you very much for joining us. We can catch up with Layla Nathu, BBC political correspondent, who is on the trail with Keir Starmer. Layla, bring us up to date with what's happening.
Afternoon, Jo. Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting have been here at the University of Worcester this morning, speaking to all of these trainee medical students you can see behind me. He's just being mobbed at the moment by, for selfies just behind where our camera is standing. But he has obviously wanted to talk about the NHS this morning, his plan, him and Wes Streeting talking a lot about their plans to try and bring waiting times down, that commitment to eliminate the 18 weeks, waiting more than 18 weeks by the end of next Parliament. But clearly, many questions, certainly from the reporters here. He's just been doing a huddle with my newspaper colleagues. Most of the questions were around Diane Abbott, and actually he gave a very clear answer to that definitively, that the story this morning that she had been barred from standing as a Labour candidate was not true. He said that was factually incorrect, that was not the case. There was still a process that the NEC was going to, and he didn't answer questions about where those briefings had come from or further questions about the handling of this situation. But I think it's fair to say he wants to draw a line under it. I mean, that is at odds with what Diane Abbott told us initially this morning, that she had said she had been barred. She then subsequently referred to the reports that she had been barred in her tweet. But Keir Starmer very definitive that she had not been and that no decision had been taken.
Leila Nathu, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. Well, let's talk about Diane Abbott because she tweeted this earlier today. Naturally, I am delighted to have the Labour whip restored and to be a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. Thank you to all those who supported me along the way. I will be campaigning for a Labour victory, but I'm very dismayed that numerous reports suggest I have been barred as a candidate. And we've just heard there from my colleague Leila Nathu, who's with Keir Starmer, that he says she hasn't been barred. I think we can hear from Keir Starmer himself probably answering those questions. Let's have a listen.
No, that's not true. No decision has been taken. Bar Diane Abbott. The process that we were going through ended with the restoration of the whip the other day. So she's a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party and no decision has been taken barring her.
I mean, this is an utter mess, isn't it, Luke Pollard, the way this has been handled? Because yesterday we were told that the investigation that was launched into Diane Abbott for comments that she made probably over a year ago now, she was suspended for saying that Jewish, Irish and traveller people were not subject to racism all their lives. That was part of what she said. She apologised for those comments and the investigation was then launched by the Labour Party. Now, Keir Starmer at the weekend said that process and investigation was ongoing. And then we were told, no, it finished in December. Then we're told she's been reinstated as a Labour MP, just as applications for candidates who want to stand in the election are pretty well closing in the next few days. She says she's been barred, though, from standing as a Labour candidate. Keir Starmer's saying, no, she hasn't. I mean, what is going on with the processes in the Labour Party and the treatment of Diane Abbott?
Well, Diane's been a trailblazer. She elected when I was 3 years old in nursery, so she has been a towering figure.
So why have you treated her like this?
I want to see, I don't know whether Diane wants to stand in the next general election. I don't know whether the NEC will have her standing at the next general election. This process is coming to the end of it. I'm glad that she's got the Labour whip back. I'm glad that...
Oh, you are glad?
I am, yeah, because it's one step towards closing this matter, because I think this is a distraction from those key issues that we need to talk about, the NHS, the future of the economy, but I would like to see this resolved. And if Diane is coming to the end of her parliamentary career, I want to see her leave with dignity. If she's able to stand again, I want her to be able to knock on doors and deliver leaflets. That's why I want this. Process to conclude swiftly. And I'd also like us to focus on what's actually happening, because over the past few days,
whose fault is it that you haven't been able to focus on the issues at hand? Do you think this has been handled well?
I'd like to see it handled in a smoother manner, of course. But now we've got a general election called. We have to resolve all those matters. So we have got a Labour candidate standing in every single constituency. That includes the constituency that Diane currently represents.
Would you like to see her stand as a candidate in the seat she's represented for decades?
Well, I don't know if Diane wants to stand.
Well,
I don't know if the NEC wants to stand.
Would you like to? And actually, there is another issue. The NEC is Labour's ruling national executive, and I have had endless Labour politicians sitting here saying, I can't say anything. It's an arm's length process. It isn't just an arm's length process. If Keir Starmer wanted to have this resolved, he could have done. He's the leader of the Labour Party. He's not just a backbench MP. Now, viewers will just think this is all ridiculous, that it's gone on for so long, that Diane Abbott's been treated like this. Maybe you should have made a decision, or maybe they should have made a decision earlier. Only the Labour Party is to blame for the way this has been handled.
Well, it's only the Labour Party that's been involved in this, but there's been plenty of people leaking and suggesting elsewhere. Right. The process is now completing, and we'll find out very shortly about whether Diane wants to stand and whether she's able to stand. And we will be having a Labour candidate in that constituency, whether that's Diane or anyone else, as we will be having Labour candidates in every single seat that we're contesting in the country.
It is true to say that individuals are not more important, or one individual is not more important than an entire party, and discipline is needed during an election. But what is your view of the way that this has been handled, Ava?
Well, I think the argument that a fair argument that could be made is that she completed the training that was ascribed to her by the Labour Party, and there was receipt of that in the February, a couple of months after it was first given to her, and then she had nothing from the party. But what's confusing to me is back when Frank Hester, the Tory donor, made racist remarks about Diane Abbott, or they were leaked to the press, the Labour Party the next day, while Diane Abbott did not hold the whip, the Labour Party sent out a fundraising email pointing pointing out that Frank Hester was a racist and he was donating to the Conservative Party. Therefore, you should fund the Labour Party to get a fairer set of MPs into power. The question I have is, why was the whip not restored then? Because she had completed her anti-Semitism training. She should have been allowed back in. But I also just want to say on the NEC, I must say it's very much like Sue Gray, when she was being used as a safe word by Boris Johnson. The NEC, as you've just done in Islington North, you can override the NEC, as you have done, and you could do that in this situation.
No one's handled this well. Diane Abbott could have made a little bit more effort to apologise for frankly disgusting comments.
She apologised.
Yeah, sort of. She blamed the staff for sending out a
What about Barry Shearman?
Yeah, sure. But she could have showed a little bit more contrition. I think the Labour Party could have probably set the bar a little bit higher than can you sit down on a laptop for 5 minutes and press yes, which we've all done online training courses. They have basically a joke. This has been handled appallingly. That said, she has a long history of making pretty divisive comments, which should be taken into account. You shouldn't just look at this in the round. At the same time, the sort of balance of Solomon here, I'm also going to say that Keir Starmer's office probably could have handled this a little better. There is a bit of a sort of Keir's sort of henchman vibe to that operation that rubs the PLP up the wrong way. It is quite leak dominated. It's often they know where this is coming from, and perhaps actually it's clear they're trying to bounce her into standing down. And it's backfired because it's just got out of control. Under the intensity and scrutiny of an election campaign, their sort of hodgepodge plan has fallen apart that, maybe they would have got away with a few weeks ago.
Well, let me just show you this headline, BBC News, a different story, but still about the Labour Party. The Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. No police action after Council House probe. So she's not going to face any further police action after an investigation into her previous living arrangements. Greater Manchester Police has been investigating the 2015 sale of her former house in Stockport after a complaint from a senior Conservative MP. She's faced questions including over whether she owed tax on the sale and paid the right amount of council tax. Does Angela Rayner deserve an apology, particularly from James Daly, who sat here and couldn't tell me what it was he wanted the police to investigate and why he thought she was guilty of anything?
I think what you've seen here is that the police know how to run an investigation and the Labour Party don't.
Well, never mind about that, but what about apologising? What about apologising for an investigation that went nowhere into the Deputy Leader?
I think it's quite clear that Angela has had the situation resolved by the police. They've resolved it very quickly. That's what investigations should do. Sadly, Diane Abbott hasn't had the same courtessy from the party that she's worked with for 30 years.
I've already talked to the Labour Party
the reality
and
is
Luke Pollard about it.
What we've got to look at is who we're potentially putting into number 10. Yeah. Because Keir Starmer says he's offering leadership, but the reality is he's not. What he's offering to put somebody in as Home Secretary a few years ago who he now doesn't think is good enough to stand as a candidate for the Labour Party. It's a remarkable switch.
Wait a minute. Suella Braverman was appointed a Home Secretary a week after having been sacked for misusing data.
So let's be clear about this. Diane Abbott should be the Home Secretary?
Let's be clear about this.
Luke, do you think...
I'm not replaying the 2019 general election with you, Tom, but what I say on this one is the mudslinging that has gone on about Angela, the slurs that have been pushed her way
Heaven forbid the Labour Party would ever sling mud.
Have not been good. I think she deserves an apology from the folks that have been throwing that mud at her, not only the Conservative MPs, but also those champions that potentially in the media that have just been relentlessly on this. And she's now been cleared, so let's focus on the clear issues that should matter. And I think, this has not been the finest point of political attack, but it's a thing we're used to. Conservative Party raising complaints with the police in election campaigns. We might even see it during this period here. It's a political tool that's designed to throw mud on something, even if they know at the end of it there's nothing to come from it, as has happened in this case, and has happened in Tamworth, and happened in the West Midlands.
Right.
I'm afraid it's a political tactic, and I think British politics would be better if we didn't use that type of
very briefly, Tom.
This is rubbish. I'm afraid the law is equal to everybody. If you don't like the law, change it. But thank goodness you haven't had the chance to, because what we need to do is to make sure that the law works equally for everyone, and that just because you're elected doesn't mean you're special. The law needs to apply to everybody.
Well, talking of leadership and leadership campaigns, let's talk to Ione Wells. She is on the bus, or has been on the bus with Rishi Sunak, and a little earlier she reported this.
So we are on the election campaign trail today with the Conservative Party. We're now on the campaign bus, but we were on the sleeper train overnight with the Prime Minister from London to Penzance. He was off to Cornwall to meet some new apprentices at Great Western Railway. This is part of this announcement today by the Conservative Party that they're going to get rid of some degrees they don't see as high value and replace them with what they describe would be 100,000 new apprenticeships. Now, it's interesting that he's chosen to campaign today in the southwest. Most of the seats around Cornwall, Devon are Conservative seats, and he has been visiting Conservative areas in the last couple of days, suggesting that so far this election campaign is being fought quite defensively. He's not going to seats at the moment that they need to try and gain. He's going to seats that they really need to try and keep if they are to win the general election. So I think it gives us a taste of what the strategy is at the moment. But this is now the third sort of announcement that we've had from the Conservative Party so far, after their announcements on national service, on pensions, and today on apprenticeships. So I think really trying to announce a couple of pledges early on in this campaign to try and seize the narrative.
Right, there's Ione Wells travelling backwards there, interestingly.
Yeah.
I think I'd feel a bit queasy on that bus. Is Rishi Sunak trying to ingratiate himself there with journalists handing out bacon rolls, or I think...
Well, it's only a very select few journalists so far that have managed to make it onto the mythical battle bus. But I did enjoy seeing the Prime Minister, who obviously loves his helicopters and loves his PJs and private jets, turning up. He looked like he was turning up for his national service with his little backpack on last night when he was getting on the train. And I've taken the Riviera Express. It is an excellent train, but it's fairly basic. It's kind of 50s style. It's a good bar, but there's no charges. So I imagine they had a wild time.
Yes, talk about the inside track there from the campaign bus. You're lucky to be here in the studio.
Indeed.
Let's talk about the apprenticeships. Show you some front pages, because the Conservatives are talking about scrapping some university courses in England to help fund them. The Daily Mail: Tory vow to ban rip-off university degrees by changing the law. This is on the front page of The Times, covering the same story. Sunak plans university cuts to boost apprentices. And the Daily Express: the Prime Minister acts to fall on university rip-off degrees. Which courses do you want to close down, Tom?
I think this is a fantastic announcement. This is about the Office for Students being able to make decisions and being able to highlight...
They've been able to do that. They've been able to do that. Which ones?
Well, they can highlight...
You've raised expectations. Acts to fall on university rip-off degrees. Which university degrees are a rip-off?
The brilliance of this policy is it's about the regulator, it's about the OFS actually having the ability to do it. Look, this is 100,000 new apprenticeships. You know, we keep talking about the fact that this is now one of the manufacturing hubs of the world. You know, we're the fourth biggest manufacturer. We're even better than France now. This is a fantastic opportunity to make sure British businesses have the opportunity to get people who are already fantastic students into jobs, into employment that really pays for them. Rather
it will only be a fantastic policy if you can actually fund these apprenticeships. Now, are you willing to see some universities close? Perhaps in parts of the country which don't have many other large employers and rely on their further education, higher education institutions?
So the key to this policy is it's about making sure that those students get the opportunities that they deserve.
By closing rip-off degrees and Mickey Mouse university courses.
Forgive me, Jo, it's not up to us to close or to open. It's up to students to choose. It's up to students to choose. And the OFS will be able to highlight and make sure that students know what they're getting. Now, that is exactly what we need. What we really need is we need students to have the opportunity to have a career, to have an opportunity to develop their skills and to see a huge change in this country. And that's what this does. So apprenticeships to change lives. And if you want to see how, look at Gillian Keegan. There's somebody who did an apprenticeship many years ago and she's ended up as Education Secretary.
Right. Ava, do you think that's a good idea, this policy?
I think that the Conservatives have correctly identified that going to university doesn't necessarily guarantee you a good job. So they've identified the symptom, but the outcome just seems a little bit confused. To me, this sort of apprenticeship scheme is sort of managing expectation, because what they're arguing is, well, if you go to university now, you probably won't get into a high-paying job, so you might as well actually start on probably about £3–4 an hour and then work your way up rather than starting with a big bill. So instead of actually solving the problems that you've got with wage stagnation and an economy that doesn't have enough good-paying jobs in it, they've gone for the apprentice route.
No, I think this is about making sure there are more good-paying jobs. Ava's absolutely right, but the way you do that is make sure that our people are skilled and have the opportunities in this extraordinary world that we're seeing. And, you know, apprenticeships come in so many different forms. As you know, there are apprentices doing anything from even financial services now, all the way through manufacturing, through science-based, through any number of different areas. This is fantastic, and all of this is a wonderful opportunity for Britain to develop.
Okay.
At the same time, Labour's offering to halve apprenticeships.
Well, I'll come on to Labour. I'll
I'll
come on to Labour in a moment. But if you're saying that you are going to have the axe fall on university rip-off degrees, we already have regulations or metrics for the regulator to look at, including dropout rates, job progression, and future earnings potential. But you want these courses to actually close. You want to close down what creative arts courses because they don't lead to jobs or highly paid jobs.
Sorry, that's not true. Many creative arts students do lead into...
I'm trying to get from you what it is you're talking about.
So that's why, as a Conservative, I'm not here to dictate to you. I'm here to give the information that the OFS can share so that students can have the opportunity to make the decision.
They've already been able to do it.
But that's what the OFS are going to be able to do, is to make it absolutely clear what the dropout rates are, what the opportunities are, so that students can have that chance to see what they're choosing and vote with their feet. Because, as Ava rightly puts it, apprenticeships are the way forward. They are the opportunity, and we have correctly identified the challenge. Now what we're doing is we're identifying the solution. Because what you need is a clear plan. If you don't have a clear plan, you don't have an answer.
Do you have a plan?
No.
Yes, we do. It's unsurprising. Bless you, Tom. Bless you. Keep rolling out that line you know is not true. Look, apprenticeships have halved since 2010. In terms of the number of people taking up apprenticeship, it's halved. It's gone down in the area that I represent. I mean, the Prime Minister might well be in Plymouth tomorrow, and the apprenticeships are down in Plymouth since 2010 under his government. So what we need to do is to properly get the skills apprenticeship levy working. The apprenticeship levy is not working. Labour's plan to move it to a skills and growth levy, which has the backing of businesses, is about allowing those businesses to invest in the skills that they need. But look, I don't think this is a fully funded policy. It's unfunded because if you simply close some courses, people that want to go to university will choose a different course. That won't provide any money for people then to invest in apprenticeships because they'll be choosing a different course to go to university. My concern about this one is it looks like yet another unfunded policy being chucked out there to distract attention from the failures on the apprenticeship level. One of the reasons that we are in the mess with our economy are because we've got a skills failure, which is leading to a growth failure. We haven't got the skills our economy needs. That's why businesses have been arguing for a change to the apprenticeship levy. We've listened to them. The government hasn't. We want to update the apprenticeship levy so it works for businesses. And with a university sector that is nearly on its knees at the moment, with universities worried about their future financial stability, you not being able to say which course and what university should close, I'm afraid will put a blight on all those courses. That's not helpful at all.
I know you want to control everything from Westminster, but we actually trust the British people and we trust institutions to make their own decisions. We don't believe in centralised control.
That's a very bold statement, yeah.
And we are suggesting devolution of the skills agenda out of Westminster to local authorities. So that's a part of our policy, Tom.
What we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that Britain is ready for the coming century, because what we need to do is make sure that those manufacturing opportunities, that those new skills that we need in the UK are there. And that's why it's such a shame that one of the things that you're talking about is effectively halving the amount that goes into apprenticeships, because as the IFS has made it very clear, what your suggestion would do is it would put a lot of money that would have gone into apprenticeships into the kind of training that's already being done. And that's a shame because it takes opportunities away from young people in order to support the interest.
That's not what the businesses are saying, though, Tom, is it? The apprenticeship levy's been failing since it was largely introduced. They want to be able to use that apprenticeship levy, not just for apprenticeships, but for reskilling and other bits of training. Apprenticeships have halved under your watch, Tom.
All right,
we need more of them. This will deliver them.
Let me bring in Harry, because there are lots of things that you could talk about the funding model of universities, because I think the question is, will tuition fees increase in England after the next election? They've been frozen since 2012, and universities are saying they must increase because they can't afford to keep universities going. Will employers ever agree that apprenticeships are the same as university degrees?
There was a long-awaited point of the crossover when apprenticeships will finally be earning the same amount as graduates. And I think we're not far off hitting it as a nation, where you're going to earn more by doing it. I think once that's happened, I think the debate will change. As a proud possessor of one of these namby-pamby humanities degrees.
Nothing wrong with those.
Who managed to find a job I quite like. I'm going to probably sit this one out. I'm more concerned about the funding model of universities in the fact they are hugely over-reliant on foreign students, which is then, as we've seen, I'm much more concerned about the amount of foreign students coming in than I am about the amount of British kids going to university, because those funding models are built on sand, and it's, as we've seen, the evidence all shows that it's a backdoor to Britain. The graduate route is a way of staying in this country country, come here as a student,
Except George
pay for the
Osborne, the former
student.
Chancellor, says it's a great British export and we should
He would
be
say that. He
supporting
created it.
Yes, but, you know, and it's fantastic for the economy. But this is an immigration argument at best, because it's also about training up, quote-unquote, British workers to work into apprenticeships and also reducing the number of students who are coming here to take university places.
Right, let's talk to Jo Coburn, because he is the pollster, co-founder and director of Delta Poll. We started the programme talking about how the parties are faring. Hello to you, Jo. Just before we go to you, I'm just going to show the BBC's election 2024 poll tracker, if we can get it up there. And you can see consistently that Labour is 20 points ahead. There it is, general election voting intention. How are voters feeling a week in about the general election, Jo?
Well, to quote a previous election campaign, nothing has changed. All pollsters, regardless of method and company, have shown no significant change since the election began, at least so far. At Delta Poll, we have Labour with a 22-point lead, and that is slightly higher than some, lower than others. The Conservatives on 45. Sorry, Labour on 45, the Conservatives on 23, and that is exactly where those parties were before the election was called a week prior. It's worth pointing out the Conservatives have not been ahead in any published poll since the 6th of December 2021, and Labour have had a double-digit lead in every poll since the 26th of September 2022. So these are now long-established, long-running trends that favour Labour. But, and I'm sure your panellists will want to say something along these lines, there are 5 weeks remaining. A week is a long time in politics, and so we have 5 weeks remaining. And it may be that some people are still to make up their mind and perhaps not even paying that much attention. But it will take a change beyond anything we have seen in an election campaign before to change the overall result.
Right, so on that, what is there still to play for? Is it all about undecided voters, floating voters who haven't yet really got stuck into this election campaign?
Well, as I say, that is part of it. But if you look at the underlying data, you see the difficulty that Conservatives are in beyond simply voting intention. When you look at leadership, the gap between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak has never been larger. We have Starmer on a net rating of +7. That's 7% more people think he's doing a good job than a bad job. And that may not sound great, but by historical standards, it's pretty close to a David Cameron or a Gordon Brown. And Rishi Sunak is a long way behind on -37. So a big gap on leadership. And then crucially, the all-important issue of the economy. Only just over a quarter, 28% of respondents believe that when compared to Labour, the Conservatives would be the best on the British economy. Right. Labour has a 19-point lead, and that number has not changed pretty much since June 2023. So how you convince those don't-know voters, given how poor the underlying data is a big question, because it's never been the case that a party has come from behind on leadership and on economic management to win the most seats at a general election. It hasn't happened at any of the previous 8 general elections I've worked on as an analyst, or any of the ones before that, and I doubt it will happen in this one too.
Jo Coburn, thank you. Are you an optimist, Tom?
I am, yes, absolutely.
You'd have to be, wouldn't you, listening to that? I mean, what can you do? Not you personally, but what can be done to reverse those figures?
So I think what we've got to do is we've got to take the message out and we've got to hold Labour to account for what they're saying, or rather not saying. They're saying any number of different things in any number of different directions. We've heard Keir going all over the place. And what we've got to do is set out the clear plan that we've got, because the clear plan we've got has reduced inflation. It's seen growth come back to this economy. It's seen us the fastest, or one of the fastest growing economies in the OECD, and it's seen waiting lists coming down. And all you need to do is compare to Scotland, where waiting lists to Labour-run Wales, where waiting lists are going up.
You mentioned Labour,
or indeed Scotland, where SNP are also doing very badly. But you know, there are huge numbers of comparisons to make, and that's what this election is about. Because in the past
let me get
months,
to it, because we've literally only got sort of a few seconds left. It's yours to lose by the looks of it when you just look at the polling data, but there is still those undecideds.
There's still people that are making up their mind. There's no complacency from Labour's side. We want to win every single vote. We're putting our effort in the places where we need to win, and we're going to continue setting out what our clear plan is to get growth back into the economy, to rescue the NHS, and make sure that we can do politics in a better way than it's been done for the last 14 years.
Well, a week in, not much has changed. Oh, no, we've run out of time. There are only 10 seconds. You escaped the question of predictions before the end of the programme. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you to all of my guests. Bye.